So this is text 5.2 and it's Jay Leno's interview with President Obama, and it's a transcript of the interview that they had in 2013, and it's from NBC, The Tonight Show, and there's a few contextual points about this one before we start looking at the text. Is that it's kind of part planned. It's part planned. So some of the questions will be planned, and the responses will be planned. But it's kind of semi-scripted because there's a degree of improvisation in the exact words that are said and those things. So there is that to bear in mind contextually. That is partially planned and it is part scripted to a certain extent. It's also a bit like a real conversation, but not exactly like a real conversation. So it does follow some of the standard rules, but it's got some strange things about it contextually as well, where it's actually being listened to and watched actually as well, of course, by other people, and that's not like a real conversation. So in terms of some of the context here, and we'll actually get onto voice in a second as well, but in terms of some of the context, it's in both Jay Leno and Barack Obama's interests to cooperate in this conversation so that the program actually works, because it would be stupid for an interviewee to not answer questions properly, though it does happen. You get people like you've seen, like David Blaine, and Meg Ryan, and these people. You can Google bad interviews or go on YouTube and have a look for them, and you can see when things go wrong. It's very uncomfortable, but you do wonder why a celebrity would not cooperate in this situation. It's part of the job, and it seems very strange not to promote the thing that you're meant to be there promoting. But anyway, I'm digressing slightly. But the key point is that they both have to cooperate. It's in their interests to cooperate. And in terms of some kind of genre features, you're going to expect in an interview as well, the interviewee is going to be speaking more than the interviewer. So expect longer turns, and that we do generally have that here as well, don't we? So longer turns from Barack Obama being interviewed as opposed to Jay Leno actually asking the questions. So we can get into the actual text itself, and so we've got the first page here, and just zoom in a bit, and in terms of voice, you've got an interesting mixture here which we'll get on to, but certainly in the first section of the interview, it's fairly informal. There are some formal elements, but there's quite a lot of informal elements here. But we'll go through it in turn and we'll see what we've got, and we'll just get the old pointer going as well. And so we open with some typical kind of genre features and structural features in terms of discourse structure of an interview. Conversations will tend to open with a greeting. So we have, that's what we've got here. So welcome the President of the United States, Barack Obama. And we get applause because it's a television show. Welcome back, sir. So this is to be expected as a typical genre feature of opening. It's a discourse marker that signals the opening of a celebrity interview. And you've got anaphora with welcome the President and welcome back. So welcome there. That kind of unnecessary repetition, it just emphasises how welcome he is in a weird kind of way, doesn't it, when you think about it? He also uses his full title, that's the formal official title, President of the United States, before introducing his full name. And there's also a deferential vocative there. So in terms of the term of address that he's using in his presence, deferential vocative, so he's addressing him in the appropriate way. Then you get typical genre features as well, or generic conventions, or in this case politeness feature. Thank you, it's good to be back, and applause from the audience there as well. Then well, we're thrilled to have you again. A politeness feature typical of conversation. There's a contraction there. These are things to be expected in this particular context. And we have it is good to be back. So his actual response reflects it's good to be back. Actually reflects his earlier line there as well. So that you get that repetition. But this is to be expected in. This isn't really scripted as such. Particularly this part. It's not even semi-scripted. So you're gonna get these tautological features is the term. This kind of unnecessary repetition. But really, what's happening here is that it's just in effect making the conversation run more smoothly. It kind of lubricates the conversation effectively. Then you've got and a happy birthday. Thank you very much. There's an adjacency pair there where you congratulate someone on their happy birthday, and then you thank them. So that's a very typical conversational feature as well. Then happy birthday to you. Familiar collocation. You can say it's there as well, can't you? Familiar collocation. It's a familiar phrase. And again, thank you. Another adjacency pair. So all this. This really is creating a sense of phatic talk. This is all phatic talk. It's not really. This isn't really what the interview is all about. Obviously, this is just establishing a rapport between interviewer and interviewee and setting up the actual main conversation. Okay, so having a look at this section here. So we go, so how did you celebrate Sunday? This is Jay Leno as questioner. What did you do? Notice that some words have been elided here, as in elision has been used. There's words that are missing from this. So how did you celebrate Sunday? That's actually very typically American colloquial kind of speech, isn't it? When words are missed out. So how did you celebrate on Sunday? Or we might say, so it's typical of an American kind of speech, and it is obviously two Americans speaking as well. So here are some of those informal elements that we were talking about earlier on. I had a bunch of friends. Yeah, technically it's metaphorical as well, actually, but we tend to use this, a bunch of friends. It's very American colloquialisms that we have here. Come over who I don't see that often from high school and college. And we played a little golf, and then we tried to play a little basketball. And it was a sad state of affairs. So we have more anaphora here as well. Again, maybe semi-prepared, at least mentally, that he's done this. It may not. He's not reading off of this, but he might have mentally prepared what he's going to ask, and he may have even seen some of these questions, even these questions, the less challenging questions. He may have seen earlier anyway. Probably did, but we don't know for certain. But we can just acknowledge that contextually that he may have actually seen these. And the anaphora here, you notice it's all frontal conjunctions, so there's conjunctions at the start of the sentence there as well, which is something we do when we speak. It's more of a feature of spoken English rather than written English, so we can throw that in as well. So there's definitely informality here with this, and a bunch of old guys. So this actually is parallel to that line. It's a bunch of friends, a bunch of old guys, and again a colloquialism there. Where's the ibuprofen and all that stuff? So more colloquialism of all that stuff. It's a colloquial phrase, and this is a cultural reference as well. We know what he means. It is that it's exaggeration, so it's really kind of hyperbolic how old they all are, isn't it? Because he's old. He's not that old, is the idea, but as if he's exaggerating how unfit they are for humorous effect. Then Jay Leno comes in with, but you're pretty competitive. This is really like a qualifier, an informal qualifier, more colloquialisms there. And it kind of appeals to kind of American values effectively as well. You're pretty competitive. So in terms of voice as well, it's a kind of thing Americans are supposedly interested in. We'll just scroll down. But the idea of competition, it fits in with all that. And there we go. So I am pretty competitive, says Obama, but the day of my birthday, we do departure photos of people who are transitioning out of the White House. Could be euphemistic, transitioning out of the White House. Sounds like bureaucratic kind of official lexis that suits his position as president as well. White House, obviously common collocation, and it's obviously famous as the centre of government for America as well. It's the president's residence. I didn't realise how much that rhymed. But anyway, president's residence. and so it's got those official connotations. So I would guess that's why it must be some kind of American bureaucratic term. And we let them bring their families and take a picture in the Oval Office. So there is a lexical set building up here of American governmental things as well. American government, features of American government. And this wonderful staff person came in and had a really cute young son. He looked like Harry Potter. Well, there's another cultural reference there as well, which the audience are all going to get. A 6-year-old guy, that's very kind of American colloquial lexis as well. He came in, he had an economic report for me, more bureaucratic kind of official lexis as well. He had graphs and everything. This is a very colloquial, structured phrase, isn't it? As we had graphs and everything, and it's deliberately imprecise. The actual real details don't matter. And the idea is 6-year-old guy, that it's a child, and so there's a kind of charm about the whole thing as well. Then this is all kind of paralanguage, if you were to write about paralanguage. Laughter comes in here, laughter, paralanguage, paralinguistic features. They're not actually words, they're just sounds and things that go as another layer of communication. And he says, my birthday is in August too. So this is all direct speech. It may not actually be a direct quotation. He may be paraphrasing. Well, how old are you going to be? He said 7. Whoa. So this is more paralinguistic features as well, as he's telling this anecdote. And of course, look at the length of this turn here. This is going to be expected with an interviewee. He looked off in the distance, familiar collocation. He was trying to project. So metaphor, the idea that he's really old. So there's lots of pragmatics at work here. And yeah, how old are you? I said 52. Well, and all this business. So there's a lot of pragmatics here of saying, oh, obviously to that child it seems really old. Yes, you can't go out that far. So this interruption here, this is a feature of real speech as well. We interrupt each other a lot when we're talking in real life, and an interview is similar to real life speech, as I've said, but it's not necessarily exactly the same. It doesn't mean that Obama's being rude or anything like that. It's perfectly cooperative. Interviewer and interviewee are cooperating to make an interesting and informative, and ultimately, the top priority is to be entertaining interview, because this isn't a serious, heavy-hitting politics show. This is light entertainment chat show. So next page, onto the next page. And we've got you can't grasp that number. No, that's metaphor. Now I've seen Michelle tease you. So this is another discourse marker. Now discourse marker signalling that he's moving into a different area of what he's talking about. And again, pragmatics is used here, presuming the audience will obviously be aware that Michelle Obama is Barack Obama's wife. I think most people would know that. In years to come, maybe not, but right now most people are going to know it, aren't they? Teach you about your grey hair. Note the American spelling as well. Doesn't really matter too much for the transcript how things are written. It's worth acknowledging with this as well is that this is a transcript, a written piece after the conversations happened. There's 2 lightsabers. I've never seen that happen before. Anyway, this is a transcript, as in it's a written recording of what was actually said. It's not written before it, or necessarily, it's not at the same time. It's been written after it. So if you might be acknowledging multimodality and thinking of those things, but remember, this is meant to be an accurate record of what was said. You can actually make these kind of transcriptions even more detailed, but that's the principle with this one. So it might be worth acknowledging that. You have a bit of silver in your hair. That's a bit of litotes, isn't it? Downplaying something. So litotes is opposite of hyperbole, playing something down. So you have a lot of silver in your hair. And silver obviously is more, it's got kind of more positive connotations than grey, isn't it? So silver's got connotations of value. Grey hair makes you think of old. Silver hair sounds more distinguished. So you could say that Jay Leno, again with the voice, he's deferential, he's establishing his inferior social position to Barack Obama, and for want of a better word, it's like sucking up, isn't it, effectively? But we can't really use a word like that, so we can talk about him being deferential or supplicant even. He's in an inferior social position, and he's appealing to Barack Obama and flattering him in that way. Do you tease back? No. And then that's a deliberate minor sentence there. Laughter and applause from the audience, and that's using pragmatics. The implication being, he's kind of, what happens here with this next part of the conversation, the interview, is that they play up to, there's a kind of comedy stereotype. I'll get onto that in a second. It's a particular comedy stereotype they're playing up to here as well. But the pragmatics is that no, I don't tease back, because that would be inappropriate to my wife. That's where the joke kind of comes from. Especially look at this bit as well. That's why we're celebrating our 21st anniversary. So that's pragmatics at work there. The implication, the pragmatics of that line, of this part of the conversation, the pragmatics are that that's why we've been together so long, is because I don't tease her back. She can tease me. I know my place in the relationship. So that's what we've got there. And the same thing, as I'm married 33 years, I know exactly what you're saying. So they're playing up to this stereotypical joke of there's a kind of stereotype of the amusingly henpecked husband. It's an interesting one because it doesn't really work the other way round. A wife who were talking of a husband in that way, it would sound like the husband was domineering, and it just wouldn't sound of like a very healthy relationship. But there's a weird thing here where it's a very kind of standard, stereotypical scenario where the husband in a long-standing relationship kind of amusingly projects this comedy idea of liking being bossed around by the wife. It's a kind of perpetuating stereotype you see in lots of different fictional and non-fictional arenas. You'll see in lots of different settings. Now, there's something really interesting here because the conversation, the interview, really shifts. So, laughter. So, after from the audience, I've got to ask you about this. There's a discourse marker there as well. Everyone is concerned about these embassy closings. Now, there's a topic shift. Everyone is concerned. Jay Leno, like, he's kind of a journalist in some ways, similar to that. It's similar to how journalists work as well, and how the news works. And as an interviewer here, he's using a typical interviewer's technique of distancing himself personally from a question. He goes, everyone is concerned. He could say he's concerned, isn't he? I've got to ask about this. Everyone is concerned. It's like I've got to ask you because everyone wants to worry about it, not I want to ask you because I need to find out about it myself. This is a standard interviewer's technique of distancing themselves from the question that they're asking, because you may know this from your study of conversation. You may have heard of things called like face-threatening acts, which is not literally like a punch to the face or anything like that, but there's an idea of conversational face where a person, it's really linked to your status. So you have conversational status, which is really face, and a face-threatening act is a potential disruption to that conversational status. So this question, being more sensitive, is a threat to Barack Obama's conversational status. So that's why Jay Leno is distancing himself from the question. Really, he's just asking it when you look at it. He's asking it. It's similar to, you'll see this all the time on the TV, if you watch TV news or anything like that, or an interview, if it's on Newsnight or any of those things. They'll ask a celebrity or a politician, the interviewer will say something along the lines of, how would you respond to claims that you should step down as leader? They can ask those kind of questions. They distance themselves from it. How would you respond to claims? They detach themselves from the question, which is always quite interesting. And the interviewee rarely reacts to it. I always think there's a way of exploiting that really for a lot of interviewees, but they don't tend to. They seem to accept it. But then that could be to do with interview genre of it's in everyone's interest to cooperate. Maybe it's something to do with that. Anyway, moving on with this, we have, how significant is this threat? So the question is much more serious now. And again, we've got adjacency pairs, question and answer. That's standard for interviews. I don't think I've really said that so far. Well, it's significant enough that we're taking every precaution. That's kind of deliberately vague as well, isn't it? And it's familiar collocation as well. We're taking every precaution, but it doesn't specify what those precautions actually are. But because it sounds like impressive, serious, and it is familiar collocation as well, but serious kind of lexical choice, it sounds like he's decisive and he knows what he's doing. We had already done a lot to bolster embassy security, so again, using pragmatics, the implication here is thinking of, well, we already did a lot. It's not our fault. We were thinking of security, but our security was penetrated effectively. We've had that's been exploited. We've already done a lot. So this is to do with face, remember, as well. It's not saying, well, we didn't do enough to protect people. He's not saying that. So we already were thinking about security. And to bolster, this is again common collocation. It's a metaphor, or familiar collocation. It's the same thing. Bolster, you've probably heard that before. It's really like boosting, effectively, reinforcing embassy security around the world, but especially in the Middle East and North Africa, where the threats tend to be highest. So he's using these like proper nouns here: embassy security, familiar collocation. All this stuff that we've talked about here is creating the impression of I'm in command. I know what I'm doing. I'm authoritative. So you've also got, like with Barack Obama, there's two things going on with the voice. One is the voice of informal, I'm a normal person on one level, I'm like you, but it's also presenting a voice where I'm above you, I'm beyond you, I'm different to you, I'm organised, I am a leader. So it's doing two things. So it's quite an interesting interview. The way it shifts halfway through is particularly interesting. And I would think it's probably why it's been picked and put in this anthology. And I like this phrase here. And whenever we see a threat stream, which is really a very, presumably this is like kind of bureaucratic or very, it's probably kind of like a very kind of trendy security services metaphor that makes what you're talking about, makes you sound efficient and in control and know what you're talking about. It sounds important. Whenever we see a threat stream, you could say a potential threat, whenever we see danger or something like that, whenever we see bad people about to do something, but threat stream sounds really, it sounds really authoritative and like you're in control. And again, two lightsabers, it's weird. So we think it's specific enough that we can take some specific precautions within a certain time frame, then we do so. Politicians are very famous for saying things that sound impressive, but when you actually look at it, they don't really mean anything. Look at this. Whenever we see a threat stream that we think is specific enough that we can take some specific precautions within a certain time frame, then we do so. That's actually probably the most obvious statement anyone could ever make. But it sounds impressive. It doesn't need to be specific. It just needs to sound impressive. In defence of Obama, the way that he's saying that, you could say, well, really, it's because it's sensitive and it's security-based. You're not going to go into loads of detail about it. That wouldn't work. He just needs to sound, the voice needs to sound authoritative and presidential to boost confidence in the audience and in him. That's all you've got to do. It doesn't really have to do anything specific at all. But this is what anyone would do, isn't it? If you were president, whenever we see a threat stream we think is specific enough that we can take some specific precautions within a certain time frame, then we do so. I mean, that's what anyone would do. But it sounds impressive. Now it's a reminder that for all the progress we've made, now the discourse marker here, so there's a shift in what you're saying. Getting bin Laden, that's very much a euphemism. See, that's a much softer way of saying something. Getting bin Laden. I mean, it was shooting or killing bin Laden. It was like getting bin Laden. It's very euphemistic. But then again, he doesn't want to sound bloodthirsty. You could say as well, don't you? Really. So putting Al Qaeda between Afghanistan and Pakistan back on its heels. I think he's made a mistake here, because this sentence doesn't really, or this part of the sentence doesn't really make sense. This is a parenthetical clause, so it's in parenthesis. So he's actually saying this as an extra thing in the middle here, but putting Al Qaeda between Afghanistan and Pakistan back on its heels doesn't really make sense. You put something back on its heels normally means you've knocked it back. Now, putting Al Qaeda between Afghanistan and Pakistan, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't add up. I think he's trying to say putting Al Qaeda back on its heels or knocking it back on its heels. I think there's words missed out. So this looks like a non-fluency feature. If you see the interview, he doesn't seem as confident with this when he's talking in this section. But Pakistan is not, it's not necessarily the same kind of status as Afghanistan. It's like it's not like America invaded Pakistan. It's a neighbour Afghanistan. I think he's mixed up here. So this is an example of a non-fluency feature, and I think we could say that it shows he's not as confident in this section of the interview. Very peculiar. If you watch the video, it has been on YouTube. If you have a look, if I remember, I'll put a link on. If it's still up, and it's worth having a look at. But he doesn't seem as confident. But anyway, we'll carry on. That this radical, violent extremism is still out there. That's all deliberately vague, because it's still out there. Where is it? Violent extremism. That sounds official and like you're in control as a phrase as well. And we've got to stay on top of it. Familiar collocation. Again, it's actually really obvious as well, isn't it? It sounds reassuring, but it's so obvious. We've got to stay, well, of course, and we've got to stay on top of it. Well, of course you have. It's obvious. It's also a reminder of how courageous our embassy personnel tend to be, because you never have 100% security in some of these places. It's all deliberately vague, imprecise language as well. And the countries themselves sometimes are ill-equipped to provide the kind of security that you want. Even if we reinforce it, metaphorical as well metaphor there are still vulnerabilities. So look at all these words. So vulnerabilities, security, embassy personnel. He's projecting this idea of I'm in control, I'm authoritative, I'm using, a lot of it is Latin at Lexis, it's these kind of things, these kind of official sounding words, bureaucratic Lexis as well, words of Latin origin as well as in Latin at Lexis. I'm in control, I know what I'm doing. But as you see, if you really look at it, it doesn't really say anything. There's nothing there that you wouldn't expect someone in his position to be doing anyway. And these diplomats, they go out there and they serve every day. Good connotations of service as well, like doing their duty. Oftentimes they have their families with them. They do an incredible job, and sometimes they don't get enough credit. So we're grateful to them, and we've got to do everything we can to protect them. So like I've said, it's all obvious stuff really, isn't it? So we're grateful to them, and we've got to do everything we can to protect them. It's all kind of obvious stuff really. It's nothing that anyone wouldn't do if they were president themselves. So I think that's the main thing with this one is that think about the voice. It's how Obama's voice shifts from being informal to being authoritative and presidential, and you can even get into that idea of he doesn't seem as confident in that in that final quarter of the interview. It really changes in tone. And you can talk about Jay Leno's deferential nature and respectful kind of tone as well. That's where I'd go with that. So hopefully you found that useful. There's many others of these. The whole anthology either is or will be available shortly. So hope you enjoyed this. Hope you found it useful. And thank you for listening. Goodbye.